Have you ever stood at your own child's funeral and felt something darker than grief? I have. The day I buried my son David, I cried like any mother would. But beneath those tears, a cold whisper kept circling in my mind. Something here is terribly wrong. By the end of that week, I would learn the unthinkable, that the coffin we mourned over held a stranger's body, and my son was still breathing somewhere in the shadows. How does a mother uncover a conspiracy when everyone believes her child is dead? The chapel smelled of lilies and furniture polish, too sweet, too clean. I stood in the front row, staring at David's photograph propped on an easel. His smile looked back at me, trapped behind glass and a black mourning ribbon. My legs felt weak. My hands trembled. Around me, people whispered. Neighbors, old friends from church. A few of David's contractor buddies shuffled in, faces tight with shock. Everyone kept their distance, as if grief were contagious. I touched the edge of the photo frame. The glass was cold under my fingertips. 43 years I'd known that face. I'd kissed, scraped knees, watched him graduate, walked him down the aisle when he married Laura. Laura. She stood beside me now, sobbing into a handkerchief. Her shoulders shook. Her cries filled the quiet chapel. But something gnawed at me, something I couldn't name yet. I glanced at her from the corner of my eye. Her mascara ran in dark streaks. Her hands clutched the handkerchief tight. But every few seconds, her gaze drifted. Not to the coffin, not to David's photo, to the table by the entrance where people left their condolence envelopes. Money. She was counting money in her head. My stomach twisted. I told myself I was being unfair. She'd just lost her husband. Grief does strange things to people. Maybe I was seeing shadows where there were none. But then I noticed her fingernails. Freshly manicured, deep red, glossy, perfect. The funeral was this morning. When had she found time for that? The service began. Pastor Williams spoke about loss and faith and God's mysterious plans. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. I barely heard him. My mind kept circling back to Laura, to those red nails, to the way her eyes kept darting toward the envelopes. People came forward to pay respects. They shook my hand, hugged me gently, said things like, "He's in a better place and time will heal." I nodded, smiled weakly, played my part, but inside, that whisper grew louder. Wrong, wrong, wrong. The casket sat closed at the front of the chapel, polished oak, brass handles, a spray of white roses across the top. They told me David's injuries from the accident were too severe. A closed casket would be more dignified. I hadn't argued. What mother wants to see her child broken? Now I stared at that box and wondered what was really inside. Laura's phone buzzed. She pulled it from her purse, glanced at the screen, then quickly silenced it. Her face went pale for just a second. Then she composed herself and dabbed at her eyes again. Who texts during a funeral? The service ended. People filed past the casket one last time. I watched Laura approach it. She placed her hand on the wood, bowed her head. Her lips moved in what looked like prayer. But I was close enough to hear her breathing, steady, calm. Not the ragged gasps of someone drowning in grief. She was performing. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen. The house felt too big, too quiet. I'd sent away the neighbors who wanted to sit with me. I needed to think. David's childhood drawings still covered my refrigerator. Faded crayon stick figures, a lopsided house with a smiling sun. I'd never taken them down, even after he grew up and moved out, even after he married Laura and bought his own place across town. Now he was gone. Or was he? I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. My hands shook as I lifted the mug. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street. The phone rang. I jumped. Hot tea sloshed over my fingers. I set the mug down and stared at the phone on the counter. The caller ID showed unknown number. Probably a telemarketer or someone who hadn't heard the news yet. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then something made me pick up. I pressed the phone to my ear, said nothing, just listened. Silence on the other end, but not empty silence. I can hear breathing. Soft, careful. Then a voice I knew better than my own heartbeat whispered through the line. "Mom, it's me." The room tilted. The phone slipped in my grip. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. That voice. "Don't hang up, please. I don't have much time." My throat closed. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. "Mom, listen. It's not me in that coffin." Laura tried to kill me. She wanted the insurance money. She and Mark, they planned everything. But I survived. "I'm hiding. I need your help." The line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs, my vision blurred. For a long moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the tile floor. Then something steadier than grief took hold. My son was alive, and someone was going to pay for putting him in that coffin. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My son's voice still echoed in my ears. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. I had to find him. David had given me just enough information before the line went dead. A motel off Route 9, the Pineview Inn, room 14. He said to come alone, to tell no one. I dressed in the dark. My hands fumbled with buttons. My arthritis made everything harder in the morning, but I pushed through. Pain was nothing compared to what David must be going through. The drive took 40 minutes. The highway stretched empty in the early light. Mist hung low over the cornfields. My old sedan rattled at every bump. I gripped the steering wheel tight. My knuckles went white. What if this was a trap? What if Laura somehow knew? What if I was driving straight into danger? But that voice, I'd know my son's voice anywhere. Even after all these years, even through fear and static and desperation. The Pineview Inn sat at the edge of town where the streetlights ended, a U-shaped building with faded blue paint and cracked asphalt. Half the rooms looked vacant. A flickering neon sign buzzed in the office window. I parked at the far end, away from the office. My legs felt stiff as I climbed out of the car. The morning air smelled like wet pavement and exhaust. Somewhere behind the building, a dumpster lid clanged shut. Room 14 was on the ground floor. Corner unit, curtains drawn tight. I knocked. 3 soft taps. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. The door opened a crack. A chain lock held it in place. One eye peered out at me, bloodshot, exhausted, but unmistakably David's. The chain rattled, the door swung open, and there he was, my son, alive. He looked terrible. His face was gaunt and pale. Dark circles ringed his eyes. A bruise spread across his left cheekbone. He wore a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants that hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight, too much weight, but he was breathing, standing, real. I reached for him. My hands found his shoulders, solid, warm, not a ghost, not a dream. "Mom," he said. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." We stood there in the doorway. I pulled him close. He was taller than me, had been since high school. But right then he felt small, fragile, like the boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. The room behind him was dim and stale. One bed with rumpled sheets, a flickering lamp, the smell of cheap coffee and unwashed clothes. Fast food wrappers littered the nightstand. He led me inside, locked the door behind us, checked the window. His hands shook. "Sit down, Mom, please. I need to tell you everything." I lowered myself onto the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged beneath me. Springs creaked. David paced the narrow space between the bed and the bathroom, 3 steps each way, like a caged animal. He told me everything. The accident wasn't an accident. Laura and Mark had planned it. Mark Stevens, the real estate agent, handsome, smooth-talking. I'd met him twice at family gatherings. David said they'd been having an affair for months. Laura wanted him dead. Simple as that. Dead husband, life insurance payout, property in her name, and Mark waiting in the wings. They'd tampered with David's work truck, the brakes. He was driving home from a job site when they failed. The truck went off the road, rolled twice, ended up in a ditch. He should have died. They'd counted on it. But David crawled out, disoriented, bleeding. He stumbled through the woods, found a hunting cabin, stayed there for 2 days, barely conscious. When he finally came to his senses, he realized what they'd done. He called a buddy, someone Laura didn't know, got a ride to this motel, paid cash. No credit cards, no trail. "But whose body did we bury?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, distant. David stopped pacing. He looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. "John Harris. You remember him? Worked at the lumber yard?" I nodded slowly. John Harris. Quiet man, early 50s, lived alone after his wife passed. Laura and Mark needed a body, David continued. Someone no one would miss right away. Someone they could make disappear. John had been helping Mark with some property deals. They lured him out, drugged him, staged it to look like my accident. My stomach turned. The room felt too small, too hot. I pressed my hand to my mouth. "His mother," I whispered. "Barbara Harris. She must be devastated." David nodded, his face twisted with guilt. I sat there on that sagging mattress, tried to process it all. My daughter-in-law, a murderer, not just willing to kill her husband, but willing to kill an innocent man to cover it up. Rage bloomed in my chest, hot, violent. I wanted to scream, to break something, to drive back to that funeral home and tear Laura apart with my bare hands. But I'm 68 years old. I've learned a thing or two about anger. It burns hot and fast, then it leaves you empty. I needed something colder, something sharper. I needed a plan. David collapsed into the room's only chair. He looked defeated, broken. He buried his face in his hands. "What do we do, Mom? If I go to the police, Laura will spin it. She'll say I'm the one who killed John. She'll say I faked my death. She's got Mark backing her up. She's got lawyers, money, connections." I watched my son fall apart. This man I'd raised to be strong and honest. This boy who used to build birdhouses in my garage. This person who'd never hurt anyone. Now he was hiding in a roadside motel, afraid to show his face, while his wife played the grieving widow and collected sympathy cards. Something hardened inside me, something I didn't know I had. I stood up. My knees protested, but I ignored them. "Listen to me," I said. My voice came out steady, calm. "We're not going to the police. Not yet. We don't have proof, just your word against hers. And you're right, she'll twist everything. So what do we do?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, saw the fear, the exhaustion, the desperate hope that maybe his mother could fix this. I was a school teacher for 40 years. I knew how to handle liars, how to gather evidence, how to stay patient while others showed their true colors. Laura thought she'd won. She thought David was dead. She thought I was just a feeble old woman too grief-stricken to think straight. She was wrong. We gather proof, I told David. We watch. We wait. We let her think she's gotten away with it. And when she's comfortable, when she's careless, that's when we strike. But how? I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. I'm going to become exactly what she expects. A broken, grieving mother, weak, confused, easy to dismiss. I'll visit her, cry on her shoulder. Let her think I trust her. And while she's busy playing the widow, I'll search that house from top to bottom. David stared at me. For the first time since I'd arrived, something like hope flickered in his eyes. You can do that. Sweetheart, I taught 7th grade for 4 decades. I caught kids cheating, lying, stealing, every trick in the book. Laura's no different. She's just bigger. I moved to the window, pulled the curtain back an inch. Outside, the parking lot was still empty. Morning sun broke through the mist. You stay here, I said. Don't call anyone. Don't show your face. I'll bring you food, medicine, whatever you need. But you have to trust me. David nodded slowly. I'm trusting you, Mom. I don't have anyone else. I turned back to him, crossed the room, put my hand on his cheek. He leaned into it, just like he did when he was small. I'm your mother, I said. I'll protect you, no matter what it takes. And I meant it, even if it meant lying, manipulating, breaking rules I'd followed my whole life. Some things are more important than rules, like saving your child. The hardest part wasn't the lying. It was keeping my face neutral when every cell in my body wanted to scream the truth. I showed up at Laura's house 3 days after the funeral, brought a casserole, chicken and rice, the kind neighbors bring when someone dies. My hands shook as I rang the doorbell, not from fear, from rage I had to keep buried deep. Laura answered wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup. She looked exhausted, vulnerable, the perfect widow. Mary, she said, her voice caught. Oh, Mary, come in. She hugged me at the door. I forced myself to hug back. Her perfume was too strong, something floral and expensive. It made my throat tight. I brought dinner, I said. My voice wobbled just right. Thought you might not be eating. Her eyes welled up. You're so kind. I don't know what I'd do without you. Liar, murderer, monster. But I smiled softly, patted her arm, played my part. The house looked different than I remembered. Cleaner, almost sterile. Laura had always been particular about decorating. Everything matched, everything coordinated. Now it felt like a staged photo, not a home where people actually lived. I set the casserole on the kitchen counter. The granite gleamed under recessed lighting. Not a dish in the sink, not a crumb on the floor. Can I make you tea? Laura asked. She was already filling the kettle, being the hostess. That would be lovely, dear. I watched her move around the kitchen, efficient, controlled. She pulled out mugs, found tea bags. Her movements were smooth, practiced, not the fumbling motions of someone lost in grief. While her back was turned, I scanned the room, looking for anything, everything. A desk sat in the corner of the living room, papers stacked neatly, a laptop closed. The kettle whistled. Laura poured water over the tea bags. Chamomile. The steam rose between us. She slid a mug across the counter to me. We sat at the kitchen table. The chairs were uncomfortable, hard-backed, modern. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and let the silence stretch. "I keep expecting him to walk through that door," Laura said finally. She stared into her tea. Her voice was soft, distant. "She's rehearsed this," I thought. "This whole grieving widow routine." "I know," I said. "I can't believe he's gone." The words tasted like poison in my mouth because he wasn't gone. He was alive, hiding in a motel room, eating gas station sandwiches, while this woman sat in his house, drinking tea, planning her next move. "Have the police said anything more about the accident?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle, curious but not pushy. Laura shook her head. "Just that the brakes failed. They think it was wear and tear. David's truck was old. He should have replaced it years ago." She said it so easily, blaming him, even in death. My fingers tightened around the mug. I forced them to relax. "The insurance company has been helpful," Laura continued. "They're processing the claim. It should come through in a few weeks." Of course. The insurance. The whole reason John Harris was dead. The reason my son was in hiding. "That's good," I said. "At least that's one less thing to worry about." Laura nodded, sipped her tea. Then she looked at me. Really looked at me. I saw calculation behind those tears. "Mary, I need to ask you something. It's difficult, but I don't know who else to talk to." Here it comes, I thought. The manipulation. "Of course, dear. Anything." She set down her mug, clasped her hands together. Her nails were painted a soft pink now, mourning appropriate. David's life insurance policy was substantial, very substantial. And with the house and his business assets, there's a lot to manage. I was wondering if you might help me. Go through his papers, his files. I just can't bear to do it alone. She wanted my help, wanted me to legitimize her theft, to be her witness, her alibi. The audacity of it took my breath away, but I nodded slowly, let my eyes fill with tears. "Of course," I whispered. "We'll do it together. For David." Laura reached across the table, squeezed my hand. Her skin was cold despite the warm room. "Thank you. You've always been so strong. Strong." She had no idea. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a fixture at Laura's house. I showed up with groceries, with flowers, with my own grief that she never questioned. And while she talked on the phone with lawyers and insurance adjusters, I searched. The first thing I found was in David's old office, a drawer in his desk that didn't quite close right. I wiggled it, pushed. Something was jammed behind it, a folder, shoved way in the back. Inside were insurance documents, but these weren't the originals. These were copies, highlighted sections, notes in the margins, Laura's handwriting. She'd been researching the policy for months, long before David's accident. Questions about double indemnity, accidental death clauses, payout timelines. I took photos with my phone. Helen had taught me how. Helen Richards, my oldest friend, a retired accountant with a mind like a steel trap. She'd been helping me from the beginning. I sent her the photos. Within an hour, she texted back, "This is premeditation. Keep looking." So I did. The basement was next. Laura had converted half of it into a wine cellar, temperature controlled, expensive bottles lined up like soldiers. But the back half was just storage, boxes, old furniture, holiday decorations. I waited until Laura left for a hair appointment. Then I went down there with a flashlight. My knees protested on the stairs. Each step sent a jolt through my hips. But I kept going. The air smelled musty, damp concrete and cardboard. I moved boxes carefully, checking labels. Most were David's things from before the marriage. Tools, books, his mother's china that Laura never wanted to use. Then I found it. A plastic storage bin tucked behind the water heater. No label, just sitting there. Innocent looking. I pried off the lid. Inside were clothes, men's clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots, all stained with something dark, reddish brown, old blood. My stomach lurched. These weren't David's clothes. They were too small. And David had been wearing his work uniform when he supposedly died. These belonged to John Harris. Deeper in the bin, I found a small zippered bag. Inside were pill bottles. No labels, just white tablets, and a syringe still in its wrapper. I heard a car door slam outside. Laura was home early. My heart hammered. I shoved everything back into the bin, replaced the lid, pushed it behind the water heater. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my flashlight. Footsteps above me, heels clicking on the kitchen tile. Mary? Are you here? I flicked off the flashlight, shoved it in my cardigan pocket, climbed the stairs as fast as my old legs would carry me. I'm here, dear, I called out. Just went down to look for that serving dish you mentioned. The blue one. I emerged into the kitchen, tried to look casual, but my face felt flushed. My breathing was too fast. Laura stood by the counter, shopping bags in her hands. She looked at me strangely. Did you find it? Number must be somewhere else. She set down the bags, kept watching me. I saw suspicion flicker in her eyes. Are you feeling all right? You look pale. Just a bit tired, I said. These old bones aren't what they used to be. I forced a smile, gathered my purse, made excuses about a doctor's appointment I'd forgotten. Laura walked me to the door. Her hand on my elbow felt like a threat. That night, I met Helen at a diner across town, far from anywhere Laura might see us. Helen slid into the booth across from me. Her silver hair was cut short and practical, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. I showed her the photos of the clothes, the pills, everything I'd found. She pulled out her laptop, opened files she'd compiled, bank statements, insurance documents, property records. She'd been digging through public records for days. Look at this, she said. Turned the screen toward me. Mark Stevens bought a cabin in the woods 6 months ago. Cash purchase. No mortgage. 40 miles north of here. A cabin. Remote. Private. The perfect place to hide a body while you staged an accident. Helen zoomed in on the property deed. Then she pulled up another file. And look at this. Laura withdrew $15,000 from their joint account 3 weeks before David's accident. Cash. No explanation. Payment. For what? The drugs, the planning, or for someone else involved? We need to get Mark and Laura on record, Helen said. Get them talking. Catch them in a lie. But how? Helen smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. You're a harmless old lady, Mary. People say things around you they wouldn't say otherwise, especially people like Laura who think they're smarter than everyone. She was right. So I started recording everything. Helen had shown me how to use my phone's voice recorder, how to keep it running in my pocket, how to position myself so the microphone picked up everything. I recorded Laura on the phone with her lawyer, heard her laugh, while discussing David's estate. I recorded her lunch with Mark at a cafe downtown, sat 3 tables away. They thought I couldn't hear, but I heard everything. The way Mark called her baby, the way she talked about the cabin, about how relieved she was that everything had gone according to plan, how John Harris had been so easy to lure, so trusting. I recorded it all. But Laura was getting suspicious. I could feel it. She started asking questions. Why was I coming around so much? Did I need money? Was I having trouble managing on my own? Then she played her trump card. She called Adult Protective Services, told them I was showing signs of dementia, that I'd gotten lost driving home from her house, that I'd left the stove on at my own home. All lies. A social worker showed up at my door. Young woman, kind but firm, asked me questions, checked my house. I could see where this was going. Laura was trying to have me declared incompetent, trying to shut me up, trying to silence me before I became a problem. But she'd made a mistake, because when that social worker sat in my kitchen, when he asked if I felt safe, if anyone was pressuring me, I pulled out my phone, played her the recordings, all of them. The social worker's face went white. She made a call, then another. Within 2 hours, a detective was sitting at my kitchen table. I told him everything about David, about the motel, about the evidence in Laura's basement, about John Harris, about the cabin, about Mark. He listened, took notes, called for backup. That night, police raided Laura's house. They found the bin in the basement, the bloody clothes, the drugs, John Harris's ID tucked in the pocket of those jeans. They brought Laura in for questioning. She denied everything at first, but Mark cracked faster, started pointing fingers, blaming her, saying it was all her idea. And just like that, their alliance crumbled, just like I knew it would. Greed and fear make terrible glue. Laura was arrested. Mark tried to run. They caught him at the airport with a one-way ticket to Mexico. I sat in my kitchen that night, alone, quiet. The recording's still on my phone. Evidence of evil hidden in plain sight. Tomorrow I'd bring David home. Tomorrow we'd start the process of justice for John Harris. But tonight I just sat in the dark and breathed and let myself feel the weight of what I'd done. Sometimes a mother has to become someone she never thought she'd be. Has to lie. Has to scheme. Has to fight dirty. Because some things are worth any price, like truth, like justice, like saving your child. The jail visiting room smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I sat on one side of a scratched plexiglass divider. Laura sat on the other. She looked different already. Prison orange instead of designer clothes. Hair limp and unwashed. No makeup to hide the darkness under her eyes. But what struck me most was her expression. Fury. Pure, undiluted fury. She picked up the phone on her side. I picked up mine. The plastic felt grimy against my ear. "You," she hissed. "You did this." I said nothing, just looked at her. Let her see that I wasn't the feeble old woman she'd thought I was. "You played me. You manipulated me. You came into my house, my home, and you lied to me." The irony was almost funny. Almost. "I didn't lie about anything that mattered," I said quietly. "You killed an innocent man. You tried to kill my son. Everything else is just details." Her face twisted. For a moment I saw the real Laura, the one beneath all those years of fake smiles and practiced sympathy. She was ugly inside, rotten. "Mark's talking," she said. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "He's blaming everything on me, saying I planned it all, that he was just following my lead." "Were you?" I asked. "Following his lead?" She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Mark's an idiot, a useful idiot, but still an idiot. He couldn't plan a birthday party, let alone a murder. So it was all you." Laura leaned forward. Her breath fogged the plexiglass between us. "I wanted out," she said. "Out of a mediocre marriage to a mediocre man. David was never going anywhere. Never going to be more than a small-town contractor fixing other people's houses. I deserved better." She said it like it was obvious, like her ambition justified everything. "So you decided to cash in on his insurance," I said. "Easier than divorce. Divorce takes forever and costs a fortune. This way was cleaner, faster, and I'd get everything. The house, the business, the money, everything. And John Harris? What was he? Just collateral damage?" Her eyes went cold, flat, like a shark's. John was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mark knew him, knew he lived alone, knew nobody would miss him right away. It was practical. Practical. She talked about murder like it was a business decision. I felt sick, but I kept my face neutral, kept listening. The prosecutor had asked me to visit her, to see if she'd say anything incriminating. The phone call was being recorded. Every word would be used against her. "Does it bother you?" I asked. "That an innocent man died? That his mother is grieving? That she buried her son thinking he died in some random accident?" Laura shrugged. One shoulder. Casual. Like we were discussing the weather. Everyone dies eventually. At least John's death served a purpose. I wanted to reach through that plexiglass and shake her, make her feel something, anything, but she was empty inside, a hollow shell where a conscience should have been. The guard signaled. 5 minutes left. "David's alive," I said. "Just so you know, your plan failed." For the first time, real emotion crossed her face. Shock, then rage, then something that looked almost like fear. That's impossible. The truck went off the road, rolled. The police confirmed it. "David's tougher than you thought. He crawled out, survived, and now he's going to testify against you." Her hands gripped the phone so tight her knuckles went white. "You're lying. You're a bitter old woman who can't accept that her son is dead. Believe what you want," I said. "You'll see him in court." I hung up the phone, stood. My knees creaked, but I didn't care. I walked out without looking back. Behind me, I heard Laura screaming, pounding on the glass. The guard moved toward her cell. That was the last time I saw her before the trial. The next few months crawled by. The prosecutor built his case, piece by piece. The bloody clothes, the drugs, the financial records, the recordings, everything pointed to premeditation, to cold-blooded murder. Mark tried to cut a deal, offered to testify against Laura in exchange for a lighter sentence, but the prosecutor didn't need him. The evidence was overwhelming, so Mark sat in his own cell, waiting, watching his life crumble. I learned later that they'd turned on each other completely. Laura's lawyers tried to paint Mark as the mastermind. Mark's lawyers did the same to Laura. They gave depositions attacking each other, contradicting each other, destroying what little credibility either of them had left. Helen and I watched it unfold from the outside. She'd bring coffee to my house. We'd sit at my kitchen table, read through court documents, trial preparations. "They're eating each other alive," Helen said one afternoon. Her tone was satisfied. "This is what happens when two narcissists collide. Neither one can admit fault, so they blame each other until there's nothing left." I thought about that, about how Laura and Mark had seemed so united at first, so confident in their plan, and now they were tearing each other apart, fighting over who was more guilty, who deserved more punishment. Sometimes I'd planted doubt between them deliberately. During those weeks, I was gathering evidence. I'd mentioned to Laura that I'd seen Mark with another woman, just a casual observation, a seed of jealousy. I'd told Mark through an anonymous note that Laura was planning to pin everything on him, that she had evidence hidden away, insurance against him ever betraying her. None of it was true, but they'd believed it. Because people who trust no one are the easiest to manipulate. They're already looking for betrayal. You just have to point them in the right direction. David stayed hidden until the trial date. I brought him groceries, clean clothes, books to pass the time. He'd grown restless in that motel room, angry, desperate to face Laura in court. But the prosecutor insisted he stay out of sight. The element of surprise was crucial. Laura's lawyers thought David was dead, thought they could cast doubt on the body's identification, create reasonable doubt. David's testimony would shatter that defense. The trial began on a cold October morning. The courthouse was packed. Press cameras lined the sidewalk outside. This case had captured attention. Grieving widow accused of murdering her husband. Secret lover. Insurance fraud. Small-town scandal gone national. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table. Helen beside me. We dressed carefully. Conservative. Respectable. Two elderly women seeking justice for their murdered loved ones. Laura was brought in wearing a gray suit. Her lawyers had styled her hair, applied subtle makeup, tried to make her look sympathetic. But I saw through it, saw the calculation in her eyes, the performance. Mark sat at a separate defense table. His lawyer had advised him to take a plea deal at the last minute, 15 years instead of life. He'd accepted, but he still had to testify, had to explain his role, had to face Laura across that courtroom. The trial moved slowly, witness after witness, the police who'd found the evidence, the forensic experts who'd analyzed the drugs and the blood, the insurance investigators who'd traced the money. Helen testified about the financial records, about Laura's suspicious withdrawals, about the pattern of planning that stretched back months. I testified about my suspicions at the funeral, about Laura's behavior, about finding the evidence in her basement, about the recordings. Laura's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive mother-in-law, claimed I was grieving and irrational, that I'd manufactured evidence because I couldn't accept my son's death. But the prosecutor had the recordings, had my voice steady and clear, had Laura and Mark talking about the murder, about John Harris, about the cabin, about their plans. The jury listened, faces impassive, taking notes. I couldn't read them, couldn't tell if they believed us, if they saw through Laura's mask. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The prosecution calls David Johnson to the stand. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts. Laura's face went dead white. She grabbed her lawyer's arm. He looked as shocked as she did. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. David walked in, alive, whole, real. He looked better than he had in that motel room. He'd gained back some weight. The bruises had faded. He wore a simple suit, walked with his head high. Laura started screaming. Actually screaming. Her lawyer tried to calm her. The judge pounded his gavel. Guards moved toward Laura's table. But David just kept walking, straight to the witness stand. He was sworn in, sat down, looked directly at Laura. The prosecutor approached him, asked him to state his name for the record, David Michael Johnson, and I'm very much alive. The courtroom was chaos. The judge called for order, threatened to clear the gallery. Eventually, everyone settled, but the energy had shifted. The surprise had landed like a bomb. David told his story, the tampered brakes, the accident, his escape, his hiding. He was calm, factual, credible. Laura's lawyer tried to cross-examine him, tried to suggest he'd staged his own death, that he was in on the plan, that he and his mother were running some elaborate scheme. But it didn't work. David's injuries were documented. The motel records showed when he'd checked in. The forensic evidence confirmed the brakes had been sabotaged. And most damning of all, the recordings. Laura's own voice admitting the plan, admitting John Harris's murder, admitting everything. Mark was called next. He tried to minimize his role, said Laura had seduced him, convinced him, threatened him when he wanted to back out. Nobody believed him, least of all the jury. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Both sides presented their cases, brought witnesses, argued over evidence, but the outcome felt inevitable. The truth was too clear, too documented. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Then they came back, guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud. Laura stood as the verdict was read. Her face was blank, empty, like she'd finally run out of masks to wear. Her lawyer touched her shoulder, but she shook him off. Mark put his head in his hands, cried, big heaving sobs, but they were for himself, not for John Harris, not for the lives he'd destroyed. Sentencing came 2 weeks later, life in prison without possibility of parole. Both of them, separate prisons. They'd never see each other again. As I led Laura away, she looked at me one last time, across that courtroom, and in her eyes I saw pure hatred. But I didn't look away. I held her gaze. Let her see that I wasn't afraid, that I'd won, that justice had been served. Then she was gone, led through a side door, back to her cell, back to the rest of her empty, wasted life. David and I walked out of that courthouse together. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but we ignored them, just kept walking, out into the cool autumn air, into the light. It was over. Finally, it was over. Victory doesn't feel the way you think it will. There's no sudden rush of joy, no moment where everything becomes perfect. Instead, there's just quiet and space and the slow realization that you can finally breathe again. The day after sentencing, David and I drove to visit Barbara Harris. She lived in a small ranch house on the east side of town, yellow siding, a garden full of late-season roses, wind chimes hanging from the porch. They made a soft, tinkling sound as we walked up the path. I'd called ahead, told her who we were, what we needed to say. She'd agreed to see us, but her voice on the phone had been hollow, distant, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. She answered the door in a cardigan and slippers. Her hair was completely white, her face lined with grief that would never fully heal. She was probably my age, maybe a few years younger, but loss had aged her. "Come in," she said. Her voice was gentle, resigned. The house smelled like lavender and old coffee. Photographs covered every surface. John at different ages. John with his late wife. John holding a fish he'd caught. John smiling, always smiling in those photos. We sat in her living room. Floral couch, lace doilies on the armrests, a clock ticking too loud on the mantel. Barbara poured us tea from a pot that shook in her hands. David tried to help, but she waved him off. "I can manage," she said. "I've been managing for months now." We sat in awkward silence for a moment. The tea was too hot to drink. Steam rose between us like a barrier. "Mrs. Harris," I began. My voice cracked. I had to start again. "Barbara, I'm so deeply sorry. Sorry doesn't cover it, but I don't have better words." She looked at me. Her eyes were pale blue, watery with age and tears. "You didn't kill my son," she said quietly. "That woman did, that man did, not you." "But if David hadn't existed," I said, "if Laura hadn't wanted him dead, your John would still be here. He died because he was convenient, because he was in the wrong place, because they needed a body. Barbara set down her teacup, her hands folded in her lap. She stared at them for a long moment. "I thought about that every day," she said. "Why John? Why my boy? He never hurt anyone. He worked hard, paid his bills, helped his neighbors. And they just—" She paused. Her voice broke. They just threw him away, like he was nothing. David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face twisted with guilt. "I wish I could undo it," he said. "I wish I'd seen through Laura sooner, stopped her before she could hurt anyone. Your son died in my place. That's a debt I can never repay." Barbara looked at him, really looked at him. Then she reached out and touched his hand. Her skin was papery, soft, warm. "You were a victim too," she said. "She wanted you dead. You survived. That's not your fault, and you helped bring her to justice. That matters. That means John's death wasn't completely meaningless. I watched this woman, this mother who'd lost everything, offer comfort to my son, offer forgiveness when she had every right to hate us." My throat tightened. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I didn't try to stop them. "We've set up a fund," I said, "in John's name, for families affected by violence. It won't bring him back, but maybe it can help others. Maybe his memory can do some good." Barbara nodded slowly. A sad smile touched her lips. John would like that. He always tried to help people, even strangers. We stayed for an hour, told her stories about the trial, about Laura and Mark's convictions, about how they'd turned on each other, destroyed each other. Barbara listened quietly, asked few questions, mostly just sat with her grief and let us witness it. When we left, she hugged us both at the door, held on longer than expected, like she needed the human contact, the warmth of living bodies when her own son was cold in the ground. "Take care of each other," she said. "You've got something precious. Don't waste it. We promised we wouldn't." The drive home was quiet. David stared out the window. I kept my eyes on the road, both of us processing what we'd just experienced, the weight of survival, the cost of justice, the complexity of moving forward when someone else couldn't. Over the next few months, life slowly found a new rhythm. David couldn't go back to his old house. Too many memories, too much darkness. So he moved in with me for a while, back to his childhood bedroom, which still had his football trophies on the shelf and a faded poster of his favorite band. We'd have breakfast together, coffee and toast. Simple things. He'd read the paper. I'd do crossword puzzles. Neither of us talked much in the mornings, but the silence was comfortable, safe. Helen visited often, brought casseroles and gossip and her sharp observations about everything. She'd become more than a friend during all this. She'd become family, the sister I'd never had. One evening, she brought over real estate listings, spread them across my kitchen table. "You two need a project," she said. "Something to focus on, something to build." "What kind of project?" David asked. Helen pointed to one listing, a small commercial space downtown, former diner, closed for 2 years, good bones but needed work. "You're a contractor," she said to David. "You know how to fix things. And Mary, you've been feeding half the neighborhood for decades. Your cooking is legendary." "A restaurant?" I said. "At my age?" Helen laughed. "Not some fancy place, just a simple diner. Good food, fair prices, a place where people feel welcome." David looked at the listing, then at me. Something sparked in his eyes, the first real interest I'd seen since the trial. "Mary's table," he said. "That's what we'd call it. I like the sound of that. Solid, honest. ours. We bought the space 3 weeks later, spent the next 6 months renovating. David did most of the construction. I planned the menu, tested recipes. Helen managed the business side. Permits, licenses, accounting. It was hard work. My back ached. My hands cramped. Some days I wondered if we were crazy. 2 broken people trying to build something from nothing. But slowly it came together. New paint, fixed plumbing, a kitchen that sparkled, tables and chairs David refinished himself, a chalkboard menu, fresh flowers in mason jars. We opened on a Saturday in May. Sunny, warm, perfect spring weather. I was terrified no one would come, that we'd sit in an empty diner all day, that this whole dream would collapse. But people came. Neighbors, friends, strangers who'd followed our story in the news. They filled every table, ordered coffee and pancakes and burgers, complimented the food, said they'd be back. David worked the grill. I handled the front. We moved around each other like we'd been doing this for years, a rhythm born from something deeper than practice, from survival, from choosing to keep going when everything said to give up. That first night after we closed, David and I sat in a booth together, exhausted, feet aching, but satisfied. The day's receipts were spread on the table, not a fortune, but enough, more than enough. "We did it, Mom," David said. He smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in over a year. "We did," I agreed. We really did. Outside, the street was quiet, shops closing, people heading home. The evening light turned everything golden, peaceful. I thought about Laura and Mark, sitting in their separate cells, staring at concrete walls, living with what they'd done, with who they'd become. I didn't feel hatred anymore, just a kind of distant pity. They'd thrown away everything real for money and greed, and now they had nothing, would never have anything again. While David and I had this, a small diner, honest work, each other. I thought about John Harris, about his mother sitting alone in that house full of photographs. We sent her money from the fund every month. She'd written us letters, thanking us, telling us about John, keeping his memory alive through stories. It didn't fix anything, didn't bring him back. But it was something, a small light in the darkness. The months turned into a year, then 2. Mary's table became part of the neighborhood, a place where regulars knew they'd get a good meal and a kind word, where lonely people could sit at the counter and chat, where families celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. David met someone, a kind woman named Sarah who worked at the library. She'd come in for lunch one day and they'd started talking about books, about rebuilding, about second chances. I watched them together, saw the way Sarah looked at him, with warmth, with respect, with something real, not like Laura, never like Laura. They got married in a small ceremony behind the diner, just family and close friends. Helen cried through the whole thing. So did Barbara Harris, who'd become an unexpected part of our lives, an honorary grandmother, a reminder that healing happens in community. On quiet mornings now, I stand in the diner kitchen, the coffee brewing, the sun streaming through the windows, the smell of bacon and fresh bread, and I feel something I didn't think I'd feel again, peace. Not the absence of pain, not forgetting what happened, but the ability to carry it, to let it be part of my story without letting it be the whole story. I'm 70 years old now. My hands shake more than they used to. My knees protest every morning, but I'm here. David's here. We survived something that should have destroyed us, and we built something good from the ruins. That's what I want you to understand. Those of you sitting here tonight, listening to this old woman's story, life will break you. It will take people you love. It will test every limit you think you have. But you're stronger than you know, wiser than you believe, and capable of more than you can imagine. A mother's love is fierce. It will move mountains, break down walls, expose lies, fight battles that seem impossible. And when the fight is over, when justice is served, when the dust settles, that same love will build something new, something honest, something worth protecting. So if you're facing darkness right now, if you're scared, if you think you can't go on, remember this: you can, you will. And on the other side, there's peace waiting. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.